They called him the hangman of Fulton County, Judge Harlan Whitaker. He didn't just sentence people, he destroyed them. And he had his sights locked on Jamal Reed, a man whose only crime was driving a luxury car while black. Whitaker thought this was just another routine destruction of a life, another statistic to feed his ego and his private prison kickbacks. He smirked as he raised his gavel, ready to deliver the final blow. But Judge Whitaker made one fatal miscalculation. He didn't notice the two quiet figures in the back row taking notes. He didn't know that the man he was about to crush was the bait for a trap years in the making. The gavel is about to fall, but not on Jamal. Watch until the end to see the most satisfying courtroom takedown in history as the sun dipped below the skyline of Atlanta, Georgia, casting a burnt orange glow across the hood of the pristine Mercedes-Benz S-Class. Jamal Reed adjusted the rearview mirror, checking his tie. It was a Windsor knot, perfectly symmetrical, resting against a crisp white collar. Jamal wasn't a man who took things for granted. He was the youngest regional director for Apex Logistics, a supply chain firm that moved half the freight in the Southeast. He had clawed his way up from a warehouse packer to the boardroom, fueled by sleepless nights and an unshakable promise he made to his mother before she passed. "I will build something no one can take away." It was a celebration. He had just closed the deal with the city for a new distribution hub. It meant new jobs for his old neighborhood. It meant security. It meant he had finally arrived. He signaled to turn onto Peachtree Street, humming along to a little Sam Cooke playing softly through the Bose speakers. The light turned yellow. Jamal eased onto the brakes, coming to a smooth, complete stop, well behind the white line. That was when the lights flashed, blue and red, distinct and blinding, filling the cabin of his car. Jamal felt that familiar cold drop in his stomach, the biological reaction that every black man in America learns before he learns long division. He turned down the music. He placed his hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2. He took a deep breath. "You've done nothing wrong, Jamal. Just a taillight. Maybe a mistake." He watched in the side mirror as the officer approached. The uniform was tight, the walk aggressive. Officer Ryan Hale. The name tag would later be burned into Jamal's memory. But for now, he was just a silhouette with a hand resting too close to his holster. Hale tapped the glass with his baton hard. Jamal lowered the window. "Good evening, officer. Is there a problem? License and registration now." Hale didn't look at Jamal. He was scanning the interior of the car, his eyes darting like a predator, looking for weakness. "It's in the glove box." "I'm going to reach for it now," Jamal said, his voice steady. Practiced. "Whose car is this?" Hale snapped. "It's mine, officer." "Yours?" Hale let out a short, dry laugh. "This is a $140,000 vehicle. You expect me to believe a guy like you owns a ride like this? A guy like me?" Jamal paused, handing over the registration. "I'm not sure what you mean." "My name is on the title right there." Officer Hale snatched the papers. He didn't read them. He crumpled them slightly in his fist. "Step out of the vehicle." "Officer, for what reason?" "I haven't committed a traffic violation. I smell narcotics." Hale lied. The lie was so casual, so rehearsed, it hung in the air like exhaust fumes. "That is impossible," Jamal said, his heart rate spiking. "I don't smoke and I don't drink. There are no drugs in this car." "Step out or I will drag you out." Hale's hand unsnapped the retention strap of his holster. Jamal calculated the odds. He was 6'2", broad-shouldered. Any sudden movement would be interpreted as aggression. He slowly unbuckled, opened the door, and stepped onto the pavement. Turn around. Hands on the hood. As Jamal complied, the hot metal of the engine burning his palms, he saw a second cruiser pull up. 2 more officers jumped out. They weren't there to de-escalate. They were there to reinforce the narrative. "What do we have, Hale?" the second officer asked. "Suspect is belligerent. Possible stolen vehicle. Smells like a dispensary in there." "That is a lie," Jamal shouted, his composure cracking. "Check the registration. Call my office. I'm a director at Apex Logistics." "Stop resisting," Hale yelled. He swept Jamal's legs. The world tilted. Jamal hit the asphalt hard, his cheeks scraping against the grit. A knee drove into his back, forcing the air from his lungs. The click of handcuffs was the loudest sound on the street. "You're making a mistake." Jamal wheezed, dust in his mouth. "I have rights. You have the right to shut up," Hale whispered in his ear, leaning down close and down at the precinct. "You're going to learn that in this town, your rights end where my badge begins." They tossed him into the back of the cruiser like a bag of garbage. As they drove away, Jamal watched through the wire mesh as a tow truck backed up to his Mercedes. He wasn't thinking about the car. He was thinking about the project, the meeting the next day, the reputation he had spent years building. He didn't know yet that Officer Hale was just the doorman. He was about to enter the house of a monster. The holding cell smelled of bleach and despair. Jamal had been processed, fingerprinted, and stripped of his suit jacket and tie. He sat on a cold metal bench, surrounded by men who looked defeated. Some were sleeping, others were pacing. Jamal used his one phone call to reach the only lawyer he trusted, Rachel Morales. She was a pit bull in a skirt suit, a woman who had fought the system for years. But when she arrived at the precinct later, her face was pale. "Jamal," she said, sitting on the other side of the plexiglass. "I saw the docket. Get me out of here, Rachel. This is insanity." That cop, Hale, he planted the narrative. They didn't find anything in the car because there was nothing to find. Rachel looked down at her file, her fingers trembling slightly. "They found a baggie, Jamal, under the passenger seat. 5 grams of cocaine." Jamal felt the blood drain from his face. "That's a lie. He planted it." "You know he planted it." "I believe you," Rachel said, her voice intense. "But that's not the worst part. The worst part is the judge assigned to your arraignment." "Who is it?" "Judge Harlan Whitaker." The name landed like a physical blow. Even corporate guys like Jamal knew the name. In the legal circles of Georgia, Whitaker was a mythic figure of cruelty. They called him the hangman, because once you stepped into his courtroom, your life was effectively over. He had the highest conviction rate in the state and the harshest sentencing record for minority defendants in the country. "Whitaker," Jamal whispered. "I thought he handled high-level felonies. Why is he taking a possession and resisting arrest case?" "He requested it," Rachel said darkly. "He specifically pulled your file." "Jamal, Whitaker runs his courtroom like a thief. He doesn't care about evidence. He cares about making examples, and he's up for re-election. A wealthy black executive caught with drugs. You're his campaign poster." Jamal was led into the courtroom in shackles. The room was freezing. The wood paneling was dark, absorbing the light. The gallery was packed, mostly family members of other defendants, weeping softly or praying. But in the front row, behind the prosecutor's table, sat Officer Ryan Hale, looking smug, chewing gum, and high above them all, on a mahogany bench that looked more like a throne, sat Judge Harlan Whitaker. Whitaker was a massive man, pale and doughy, with thinning gray hair slicked back against his skull. His eyes were small, watery, and devoid of humanity. He didn't look at files. He looked at people. He scrutinized them like insects he was deciding whether to crush or pin. Case number 4922B, the bailiff announced, State of Georgia versus Jamal Reed. Rachel stood up. Your Honor, Rachel Morales for the defense. We are requesting bail be set at... Sit down, Ms. Morales, Whitaker boomed. His voice was a deep, gravelly rasp. I haven't heard the charges. Your Honor, the charges are possession of a controlled substance and resisting arrest. The prosecutor, a weaselly man named Todd Vance, who acted as Whitaker's lapdog, recited, The defendant was belligerent and assaulted Officer Hale during the traffic stop. Assaulted, Jamal blurted out. I never touched him. Bang! The gavel strike was like a gunshot. Another outburst from the defendant. And I will have you gagged, Whitaker sneered. He leaned over the bench, staring directly at Jamal. You think because you wear a fancy suit, you're above the law, boy. The word hung in the air. Boy. It was a deliberate, calculated slur. Your Honor, Rachel interjected, her voice sharp. My client is a respected executive with no prior record. The use of such language is prejudicial. Overruled. Whitaker barked. I call them like I see them. This man drives a car worth more than my bailiff makes in years. You expect me to believe he earned that? Honestly, we know how people like him get money in this city. A murmur went through the court. This was blatant. It wasn't just bias. It was open hostility. Bail is denied, Whitaker said, shuffling the papers. Denied? Rachel gasped. For a first-time possession charge. That is unconstitutional. The guidelines suggest. I am the guidelines in this courtroom. Whitaker roared, his face turning a blotchy red. This man is a flight risk. He has resources. He is a danger to the community. He stays in county until trial. Trial is set for soon. Soon? Rachel shouted. I need time to prepare. I need discovery. We haven't even seen the dashcam footage. Motion for continuance denied, Whitaker said, a cruel smile twisting his lips. If he's innocent, surely you can prove it quickly. Get him out of my sight. As the bailiffs grabbed Jamal by the arms, he looked back at the judge. Whitaker was already looking away, checking his watch, bored. But as Jamal was dragged toward the side door, he locked eyes with two people sitting in the very back row of the gallery. They didn't look like the usual crowd. A woman in a navy blazer and a man with a buzz cut. They weren't crying. They weren't praying. The woman, Agent Emily Carter, adjusted her glasses and wrote something in a small notebook. The man, Agent Jason Ross, tapped an earpiece. Jamal didn't know who they were, but he saw the look in the woman's eyes. It wasn't pity. It was anger. And it wasn't directed at him. It was directed at the judge. As the heavy door slammed shut, separating Jamal from his freedom, the nightmare truly began. But unbeknownst to Whitaker, the hunter was being hunted. Such short notice was not enough time to prepare a defense for a jaywalking ticket, let alone a felony drug case that carries a mandatory minimum sentence in Georgia. Rachel Morales knew this. Judge Whitaker knew this. It was the point. Rachel's office was a war zone of crumpled coffee cups and legal pads. She hadn't slept. They're stonewalling us on everything, Jamal, Rachel said, holding her phone to her ear with her shoulder as she frantically typed on her laptop. She was speaking to Jamal, who was using his allotted daily call from the county jail. His voice sounded hollow, unrecognizable from the confident executive of days ago. Have you seen the dashcam footage, Rachel? That's all we need. It will show I never resisted. It will show Hale was aggressing from second one. Rachel stopped typing. The silence on the line stretched. Rachel. Vance. The prosecutor just sent over the discovery file. Rachel said, her voice tight with suppressed rage. There's a memo regarding Officer Hale's cruiser video system, and it malfunctioned. According to the police report, the entire system crashed right before he pulled you over. It didn't record a single frame of the encounter. Jamal laughed, a ragged sound bordering on hysteria. Of course it did. Of course it malfunctioned. And the body cam. Officer Hale forgot to activate it until after you were in cuffs and the drugs were found. Jamal, they wiped it clean. It's their word against yours. Rachel didn't tell him the other things she found. She had her paralegal dig into Officer Ryan Hale's service record. It was a graveyard of civil rights complaints, excessive force, racial profiling, illegal searches, complaints over the years, and every single one of them had been dismissed. When she cross-referenced the dismissals with the court docket, a sickening pattern emerged. Most of the cases involving Officer Hale's arrests landed in Judge Harlan Whitaker's court. It wasn't just bad luck. It was a pipeline. Hale supplied the bodies. Whitaker supplied the sentences. And somewhere along the line, money was changing hands. They were running a human trafficking ring under the guise of the justice system. Listen to me, Jamal, Rachel said, trying to inject steel into her voice. Whitaker wants a quick conviction. He wants you scared. He wants you to take a plea deal in the morning just to make it stop. Are you going to do that? No, Jamal whispered. I didn't do this. My mother. She worked 3 jobs so I wouldn't end up in a place like this. I won't plead guilty to their lies. Good. Then we fight with what we have, which is the truth. Get some sleep. Rachel hung up. She stared at the wall. They were going into a gunfight, armed with a plastic spoon. Miles away in a sterile hotel room serving as a temporary FBI command post, Agent Emily Carter was listening to a recording of that very phone call. Whitaker is accelerating the timeline, Agent Jason Ross said, pacing the room. Such a rushed felony trial. He's practically broadcasting the fix. He's arrogant, Carter said, taking off her headphones. He's been doing this for years in Fulton County, and nobody has ever touched him. He thinks he's God in that courtroom. On the desk between them were stacks of surveillance photos, pictures of Officer Hale meeting with Prosecutor Vance in a strip club parking lot, pictures of Vance handing a thick manila envelope to Judge Whitaker's bailiff behind the courthouse. They had the pieces, but they didn't have the smoking gun, the direct link to Whitaker himself. We need him on record, Ross said. We need Whitaker to explicitly violate Reed's constitutional rights in open court in a way that can't be attributed to mere incompetence. He will, Carter said coldly. Men like Whitaker can't help themselves. When they feel challenged, they double down on the cruelty. He's going to try to bury Jamal Reed, and we're going to let him dig the hole. The courtroom felt different on the day of the trial. The air was thicker, hotter. The gallery was packed to capacity. Word had spread that the hangman had a big fish on the hook, a rich black man who needed to be taken down a peg. Jamal was brought in wearing an ill-fitting orange jumpsuit. Whitaker had denied Rachel's motion to allow Jamal to wear civilian clothes, citing security concerns. It was another tactic to prejudice the jury before a word was even spoken. Look at him, the jumpsuit said. He's already a convict. Jamal sat at the defense table, his shoulders slumped. He looked older. He scanned the crowd, his eyes landing briefly on the 2 agents in the back row. They were still there, watching. Judge Whitaker entered, his black robe billowing around his massive frame. He didn't sit. He fell into his chair, glaring at the defense table. Let's get this over with. Whitaker grumbled into the microphone. Jury selection was a farce. Whitaker took over the questioning, a highly unusual move. He dismissed any potential juror who expressed even a mild skepticism of police testimony. He dismissed a young black teacher because she wore a Black Lives Matter pin, calling it terrorist insignia in open court. They had a jury, 8 white men, 4 white women. Most were older, from the affluent suburbs outside the city. People who viewed men like Jamal as an inherent threat to their property values. Prosecutor Vance gave his opening statement. It was smooth, rehearsed, and completely fabricated. He painted Officer Hale as a hero, holding the line against chaos, and Jamal as a violent drug trafficker hiding behind a corporate facade. When Rachel stood up, Whitaker immediately began shuffling papers, making a show of his boredom. "Ladies and gentlemen," Rachel began, her voice shaking slightly. "The state wants you to believe a fairy tale. They want you to believe that a man at the pinnacle of his career, with everything to lose, decided to drive around with cocaine and fight a police officer. The truth is ugly. The truth is that my client was targeted because of the color of his skin and the car he drove. The truth is that the evidence was planted." Bang! "Objection," Vance yelled, though he hadn't stood up. "Sustained." Whitaker roared, pointing a meaty finger at Rachel. "Ms. Morales, you will not use my courtroom to peddle conspiracy theories against our law enforcement. One more word about targeting and I will declare a mistrial and hold you in contempt. Your Honor, it is central to our defense theory. Your defense theory is irrelevant if it lacks evidence. Sit down." Jamal put his head in his hands. It was hopeless. The state called its only witness, Officer Ryan Hale. Hale walked to the stand with a swagger. In his dress uniform, polished and pressed, he looked like the picture of American virtue. Under Vance's gentle questioning, Hale recited the lies. "He was swerving, sir, crossing the double yellow line. When I approached, the smell of unburnt cannabis was overwhelming. I asked him to step out, and he became combative. He swung at me. And then, what happened?" "Officer Hale," Vance asked tenderly. "I subdued him for my own safety. During a subsequent search of the vehicle, I discovered a bag containing a white, powdery substance under the driver's seat where he had been reaching." "Thank you, officer. Your witness." Rachel stood up. This was it. The only shot they had. "Officer Hale," Rachel said, walking toward the stand. "You testified you smelled cannabis. Did you find any cannabis in the car?" Hale smirked. "No, we believe he may have tossed it before I approached." "You believe? But you didn't see it. You also testified my client swung at you. That is a felony assault. Why wasn't he charged with assault?" Vance stood up. "Objection. Irrelevant. Sustained." Whitaker bored. "Stick to the drug charges, counselor." Rachel grit her teeth. "Officer, isn't it true your dash cam system was working perfectly right up until you spotted Mr. Reed's car? Like I put in my report," Hale said dryly. "It malfunctioned. Bad luck." "Bad luck," Rachel repeated. She picked up a piece of paper. "I have here the maintenance logs for your cruiser, officer. Your camera system was serviced and certified fully operational, just days before this arrest." Hale blinked. For the first time, his composure cracked. He looked quickly at Prosecutor Vance, then up at Judge Whitaker. "Machinery breaks, lady," Hale snapped. "And the body cam. You forgot to turn it on until after you allegedly found the drugs. In the heat of the moment, dealing with a violent suspect." "Yes, I forgot." Rachel leaned in on the podium. "Officer Hale, in your police report, you stated you found the drugs under the passenger seat. Just now, under oath, you told this jury you found them under the driver's seat. Which lie is it?" The courtroom went dead silent. Hale froze. He had slipped. The rehearsal hadn't covered that detail. I misspoke just now," Hale stammered. "It was the passenger seat. So, you lied under oath just moments ago." "Objection!" Badgering the witness. Vance screamed, sustained. Whitaker bellowed, his face turning purple. He hammered the gavel repeatedly. "Miss Morales, step back. You are trying to trick this officer with semantics. Your Honor, it is a material contradiction in his testimony regarding the central piece of evidence." Rachel cried out, pointing at Hale. "He is lying to this court. That is enough." Whitaker stood up, his chair screeching back. "I've heard enough of these theatrics. The jury will disregard the defense attorney's last outburst. Officer Hale, step down." "Does the state rest?" "We rest, Your Honor," Vance said quickly, looking relieved. "Mr. Reed," Whitaker said, turning his baleful gaze on Jamal, "your lawyer seems interested in fairy tales. Unless you have actual evidence to present, I suggest we move to closing arguments." Rachel looked at Jamal. Her eyes were filled with tears of frustration. They had caught the cop lying, and the judge had simply erased it from the record. They had nothing left. "The defense rests, Your Honor," Rachel whispered, defeated. In the back row, Agent Emily Carter closed her notebook with a sharp snap. It was loud enough to make the person next to her jump. She looked at Agent Ross and gave a barely perceptible nod. They had heard enough, too. The trap was primed. Now it was time to spring it. The jury was out for a short time. In a complex felony case involving drug possession and assaulting an officer, deliberations usually take hours, sometimes days. Such a quick return meant they hadn't deliberated at all. They had simply walked into the room, taken a poll, and walked back out. Jamal sat at the defense table, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. Rachel Morales was staring at the table, her face a mask of stone. She knew what was coming. Every lawyer in the room knew. All rise. The bailiff droned. Judge Harlan Whitaker returned to the bench. He looked energized, almost giddy. He had a steak dinner scheduled with the warden of the private detention center that held the county's overflow inmates, a warden who paid Whitaker a consulting fee for every head he sent their way. Whitaker checked the clock. Plenty of time to ruin this man's life and still make his reservation. "Have you reached a verdict?" Whitaker asked, not even looking at the foreman. The foreman, a heavy-set man who had spent the entire trial glaring at Jamal, stood up. "We have, Your Honor." "Read it." "On the charge of possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute, we find the defendant, Jamal Reed, guilty." A gasp ripped through the gallery. Jamal closed his eyes. He felt like he was falling. "On the charge of resisting arrest," the foreman continued, "we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of assault on a police officer, we find the defendant guilty." Whitaker smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the rictus grin of a shark biting into a seal. "Thank you for your service to this community," he told the jury. "You have done a difficult but necessary job today." He turned to Jamal. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. "Jamal Reed," Whitaker began, his voice dropping an octave for dramatic effect, "you stand before me a convicted felon. You thought your money could buy you out of this. You thought your suit could hide your nature. But the law sees all." "I am innocent," Jamal said quietly. Silence. Whitaker slammed his hand on the bench. "You show no remorse even now. That only proves you are beyond redemption. You are a cancer on this city, Mr. Reed. A wolf in sheep's clothing. Your Honor. Rachel stood up, desperate. We request a pre-sentencing investigation. We ask for a date to be set for sentencing so we can gather character witnesses and... Denied. Whitaker cut her off. I've heard all I need to hear. I see no reason to delay justice. I am ready to sentence the defendant now. Now? Rachel cried. That is highly irregular. He has no prior record. The guidelines suggest probation or a minimum stay. The guidelines, Whitaker sneered, are advisory. I am the judge, and I judge this man to be a menace. Whitaker leaned forward, relishing the moment. This was the part he lived for, the power of God. On the count of possession, I sentence you to decades in the Georgia Department of Corrections. On the count of assault, more years. On the count of resisting, additional years. The courtroom went dead silent. It was a death sentence. Sentences to run consecutively, Whitaker added, delivering the final twist of the knife. You will not be eligible for parole until you have served a long stretch. You will leave prison an old man, Mr. Reed, if you leave at all. You can't do this, Jamal shouted, standing up, tears finally streaming down his face. I have a life. I built a company. I help people. Bailiff, take him into custody, Whitaker ordered, waving his hand as if swatting a fly. Get him out of my sight. Officer Hale, standing by the wall, was grinning. He stepped forward, unhooking a pair of heavy transport chains from his belt. He was going to enjoy this. He was going to chain Jamal Reed up like an animal, right in front of the judge. As Hale grabbed Jamal's shoulder and spun him around, Jamal looked up at the ceiling, praying for a miracle. He didn't know the miracle was already in the room. Stop. The word didn't come from Rachel. It didn't come from Jamal. It came from the back of the courtroom, booming with a command that froze everyone in place. Officer Hale paused, the handcuffs dangling inches from Jamal's wrists. Judge Whitaker looked up, annoyed. Who dares interrupt my court? Whitaker bellowed. Bailiff, arrest that man for contempt. Agent Jason Ross was walking down the center aisle. He didn't look like a spectator anymore. His stride was predatory. Behind him, Agent Emily Carter was moving toward the court reporter, flashing a gold badge that caught the courtroom lights. Sit down! Whitaker screamed. I said, Bailiff! Seize him! The bailiff moved toward Ross. Ross didn't break stride. He held up a hand, palm out. Federal agent. Sit down, deputy, or you go down with the ship. The bailiff froze. The mention of federal sucked the air out of the room. Ross stopped at the gate, separating the gallery from the well of the court. He looked directly at Judge Whitaker. Judge Harlan Whitaker, Ross said, his voice calm and deadly loud. I am Special Agent Jason Ross with the FBI's Public Integrity Task Force. Beside me is Special Agent Carter. Whitaker's face went from red to a ghostly white in a split second. He tried to bluster through it. I don't care who you are. You have no jurisdiction in my courtroom. This is a state matter. I am in the middle of a sentencing hearing. The sentencing is over, Harlan, Agent Carter said from the side of the room. She wasn't using his title. And so is your career. Get out! Whitaker shrieked, his voice cracking. I will have you both disbarred. I will have you arrested. No, Ross said, unbuttoning his jacket to reveal the sidearm on his hip. You won't, because a federal warrant was issued for your arrest. The courtroom erupted. Reporters who had been half asleep in the back row jumped up, phones recording. Rachel Morales looked from the agents to Jamal, her mouth open. Arrest, Whitaker sputtered. For what? Being a tough judge? That's not a crime. For racketeering, wire fraud, conspiracy to deprive civil rights, and multiple counts of obstruction of justice, Ross recited, stepping through the gate. Lies, Whitaker yelled. You have no proof. Proof? Carter laughed darkly. She walked over to the defense table and plugged a small flash drive into the court's presentation laptop. Let's talk about proof. Let's talk about the Mercedes-Benz S-Class. Officer Hale, who had been slowly backing away toward the side exit, froze. Officer Hale, Carter said, looking at him. You're a smart guy. You wiped the body cam. You crashed the cruiser's dash cam. But you made one mistake. You didn't know cars have evolved. Carter hit a key on the laptop. The large projection screen behind the judge, usually used to display evidence against defendants, flickered to life. A high-definition video appeared. It was a wide-angle view from the dashboard of Jamal's car. The Mercedes S-Class, Carter narrated, has a built-in 360-degree security system called the Guard 360. It records to a cloud server anytime the vehicle is jostled or detects a collision event. It also records audio inside the cabin. On the screen, the courtroom watched the traffic stop unfold in crisp resolution. They saw Jamal's car come to a complete, gentle stop. They saw Officer Hale approach aggressively. They heard the audio perfectly. Audio? Whose car is this? You expect me to believe a guy like you owns a ride like this? Racially motivated bias, Carter noted. Then on the screen, the moment of truth. Hale yanked Jamal out of the car. Jamal did not swing. Jamal didn't resist. He was thrown to the ground. And then the courtroom gasped in unison. On the video, while Jamal was pinned on the ground outside, the camera inside the car captured Officer Hale leaning into the open window. He reached into his own pocket, not the car, and pulled out a small plastic baggie. He checked to make sure no one was watching and shoved it under the passenger seat. There it is, Ross said, pointing at the screen. Fabrication of evidence, a federal crime. Officer Hale bolted. He shoved the bailiff aside and sprinted for the side door. Stop! Now! Ross yelled into his earpiece. The side door flew open, and a team of FBI tactical agents in full-body armor burst in. Hale ran straight into a riot shield. He was tackled instantly. His face pressed against the same floor where he had hoped to see Jamal dragged away. Judge Whitaker sat paralyzed on his bench. His hands were shaking so hard, the gavel rolled off the desk and clattered onto the floor. But that's just the cop, Whitaker stammered, sweat pouring down his face. I didn't know. I'm a victim here, too. He misled the court. Nice try, Harlan, Ross said. He walked up the steps to the bench. No one stopped him. But we have the wiretaps. Wiretaps. Whitaker squeaked. We've been up on your phone, Ross said loud enough for the back row to hear. We heard you call Warden Reynolds. We heard you ask, and I quote, I've got a rich one coming in, Reed. If I give him a long sentence, what's the bonus structure looking like? The gasp from the gallery was replaced by a roar of anger. People stood up. Monster! Someone shouted. We also heard you talking to Prosecutor Vance, Ross continued, pointing at the weaselly prosecutor who was currently trying to hide under his table. You told him, make sure the jury is white, and make sure Hale keeps his mouth shut about the camera. You knew, Harlan. You orchestrated the whole thing. Ross pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. Not the cheap ones. Heavy federal steel. Judge Harlan Whitaker, Ross said. Stand up. Whitaker didn't move. He looked like a deflated balloon. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the terrified, pathetic reality of a bully who has finally met a bigger stick. I said, stand up. Ross grabbed Whitaker by the collar of his robe and hauled the massive man to his feet. Whitaker began to cry, huge, heaving sobs. "Please," he whimpered. "I'm a judge. You can't do this here." "Not in front of them." "You didn't mind destroying his life in front of them," Ross said, gesturing to Jamal. "Turn around." Ross spun the judge around. He cuffed his hands behind his back over the black robes. "Get him out of here." Ross signaled to the tactical team. Two agents grabbed Whitaker by the arms and began marching him down the steps of the bench, the same steps he had looked down from for years. As they dragged him past the defense table, Whitaker locked eyes with Jamal. Whitaker's eyes begged for mercy. Jamal just looked at him, his expression calm, his dignity intact. "Ms. Morales," Agent Carter said, walking over to the defense table. "The United States Attorney has already filed a motion to vacate the verdict and dismiss all charges with prejudice. Your client is free to go." Rachel burst into tears. She grabbed Jamal and hugged him. Jamal didn't cry. He watched Officer Hale being dragged out one door and Judge Whitaker being dragged out the other. But the story wasn't over. The karma was just beginning. Because federal prison is a very different place for a judge than for anyone else. And Jamal Reed had one more move to make. The immediate aftermath of the arrest in the courtroom was not silence. It was a roar that shook the foundations of the Fulton County justice system. As FBI tactical teams secured the building, seizing servers, cell phones, and filing cabinets, two very different processions were taking place. Out the back service entrance, usually reserved for the trash and the condemned, Judge Harlan Whitaker was being shoved into the back of an unmarked federal SUV. His hands were cuffed so tightly behind his back that his circulation was cutting off. But no one cared about his comfort. He was hyperventilating, his face pressed against the tinted glass, watching his empire recede into the distance. For years, he had left this building in a chauffeur-driven town car, heading to steakhouses and country clubs. Today, he was heading to the Federal Detention Center, a concrete box in the humid heart of Atlanta. Out the front doors, however, it was a different scene. Jamal Reed stepped into the late afternoon sun, the golden light hitting his face like a benediction. He took a deep breath, the first breath of true freedom he had taken in days. Next to him stood Rachel Morales, her mascara slightly running from tears of relief, and Agents Ross and Carter, the silent guardians who had sprung the trap. A flank of news cameras was waiting. The story had leaked instantly. Judge Whitaker arrested in courtroom sting. It was the kind of headline that stopped traffic. "Mr. Reed," a reporter from Channel 11 shouted, thrusting a microphone forward. "You were facing a long stretch in prison just moments ago. Now the judge who sentenced you is in handcuffs. What is going through your mind?" Jamal adjusted his cuffs. He looked calm, almost regal. He didn't scream or cheer. He looked directly into the camera lens. "Today the system tried to eat me alive," Jamal said, his voice carrying over the noise of the crowd. "It thought I was food. It thought I was just another number to be processed for profit. But they forgot one thing. Even a beast will choke if the bone is too hard. Judge Whitaker isn't a judge anymore. He's a criminal. And I'm going home to my daughter." While Jamal was hugging his family, Harlan Whitaker was experiencing the first circle of his personal hell. The Federal Detention Center does not care about your resume. Whitaker was brought into the intake processing area, a large, sterile room that smelled of industrial disinfectant and old fear. He was unchained from the transport agents and handed over to the corrections officers. "Strip," a guard barked. He was a young man, stone-faced, snapping a pair of blue latex gloves. "Do you know who I am?" Whitaker sputtered, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and terror. "I am Judge Harlan Whitaker. I play golf with the governor. I demand to see the warden immediately." The guard didn't even blink. Warden Reynolds was arrested for wire fraud and conspiracy inmate. He's in a holding cell 3 floors down. Now strip, or we will strip you. The reality hit Whitaker like a physical blow. The warden, his co-conspirator, his drinking buddy, was gone. The shield was gone. Whitaker, a man who had mocked defendants for their appearance, was forced to undress under the harsh fluorescent lights. He stood naked, shivering, his pale, doughy flesh exposed. He was subjected to a cavity search, the ultimate invasion of privacy, a humiliation he had ordered for thousands of men without a second thought. Now he was the one bent over, coughing on command. He was tossed a jumpsuit. It wasn't the pressed uniform of an officer. It was orange. The fabric was coarse, smelling faintly of the previous wearer's sweat. It was too small, tight around his gut. "Inmate 7440, the guard said, handing him a thin, scratchy blanket. "Welcome to the terrifying reality you helped build." Whitaker was placed in a segregation cell for his protection, but the isolation was worse than the general population. It was a small box, no window, one steel toilet, one concrete slab. That night, as the lights buzzed overhead, Whitaker curled into a ball. He reached for his phone to call his broker to move his money to fix this, then realized his pockets were empty. He reached for his gavel and realized his hand was empty. He wept, a guttural, ugly sound as the realization set in. The hangman has been hung. Over the following period, the Department of Justice dismantled Whitaker's life with surgical precision. Agent Jason Ross led the investigation. They didn't just find a few bribes. They found a sophisticated criminal enterprise. Whitaker had been receiving kickbacks from the private prison industry for every year of sentencing he handed down. He had been shorting stocks of companies owned by defendants he was about to rule against. But the hardest blow came from his friends. Prosecutor Vance, the weaselly man who had prosecuted Jamal, flipped on Whitaker in less than a day to save his own skin. He gave the feds everything: the secret ledgers, the burner phones, the meeting locations. Officer Ryan Hale, facing a long sentence, testified that Whitaker explicitly instructed him to target expensive cars driven by minorities to generate revenue for the court through asset forfeiture. Whitaker watched from his cell as his legal team abandoned him. His assets were frozen. His bank accounts in the Caymans were seized by international warrant. His mansion in Buckhead was foreclosed upon. His wife filed for divorce and took the kids, issuing a statement that she was unaware of her husband's activities. He was alone, penniless, defenseless. The trial of the United States versus Harlan Whitaker was the most watched legal event in Georgia history. It was moved to the federal courthouse in Atlanta to ensure a fair jury, though finding anyone who didn't hate Whitaker was nearly impossible. Presiding over the case was Judge Susan Caldwell. She was a legend on the federal bench, a woman known for her intellect and her absolute intolerance for corruption. She was everything Whitaker pretended to be. On the day of sentencing, the courtroom was packed. But this wasn't the usual crowd. The gallery was filled with Whitaker's survivors, men and women, mostly Black and Latino, whom Whitaker had wrongfully imprisoned over the years. They sat in silence, wearing T-shirts that read, "Justice, finally." Jamal Reed sat in the front row. He looked at Whitaker, who was slumped at the defense table. Whitaker looked older. His hair had fallen out in clumps from stress. He had lost weight from the prison food. He looked like a ghost. Judge Caldwell adjusted her glasses and looked down at the disgraced man. "Harlan Whitaker," she began, her voice quiet but filling the room. You sat on a bench that represents the highest ideal of our society, equal justice under the law. You took that ideal and you sold it. You turned this court into a marketplace where human years were the currency. Whitaker stood up, his legs shaking. Your Honor, I was a victim of the culture. I ask for mercy. Mercy? Caldwell's eyes flashed. You asked for what you never gave. You sentenced Jamal Reed to a long stretch for a crime you knew he didn't commit. You tried to bury a good man to buy a vacation home. She opened the file in front of her. Under the RICO Act and federal sentencing guidelines, given the severity of the civil rights violations and the sheer volume of victims, I have very little discretion, nor do I want any. Harlan Whitaker, I sentence you to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. A gasp went through the room, not of shock, but of pure release. People hugged each other. Some wept. Furthermore, Caldwell continued, twisting the knife. I am ordering immediate restitution. Every dollar you have, every property, every hidden account the FBI has uncovered, it is all forfeited. It will go into a fund to compensate the victims of your court. You leave this life with nothing. But the universe wasn't done with Harlan Whitaker yet. There is a specific irony to the American prison system. Years prior, as a tough-on-crime judge, Whitaker had heavily lobbied the state legislature to cut funding for special protective custody units. He had argued in op-eds that criminals don't deserve hotels, and that protective custody was a waste of taxpayer money. His lobbying had worked. The budget was slashed. Now, as a federal inmate, that policy came back to haunt him. Because of the overcrowding in the protective units, overcrowding caused by the very laws Whitaker enforced, the Bureau of Prisons had no choice. After a stretch in isolation, Whitaker was deemed low risk enough to be moved to a general population unit at a medium security facility in central Georgia. He was walked onto the block during recreation hour. The noise in the yard stopped. Hundreds of men stopped lifting weights, stopped playing basketball, and turned to look. They didn't see an old man. They saw the hangman. They saw the man who had put half of their cousins, brothers, and fathers away. Whitaker clutched his laundry bag, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He looked for a guard, but the guard was at the far end of the yard looking at his phone. A shadow fell over Whitaker. He looked up. Standing there was a massive inmate, scarred and tattooed. Whitaker recognized him. It was the very first man Whitaker had ever sentenced years ago, a man who had claimed innocence, whose evidence Whitaker had suppressed. "Hello, Judge," the man said, smiling. It wasn't a nice smile. Court is now in session. Whitaker wasn't killed. That would have been too easy. He was beaten badly. He spent months in the infirmary drinking meals through a straw. When he recovered, he was sent back to the block. He spent the rest of his life in a state of perpetual terror, looking over his shoulder, living in the exact nightmare he had created for others. He died alone, unmourned, his name becoming a synonym for corruption. While Whitaker rotted, Jamal Reed flourished. The civil settlement from the county was historic. Jamal didn't buy a yacht. He didn't retire. He resigned from Apex Logistics and founded the Reed Justice Initiative. He hired Rachel Morales as his chief legal officer. Together, they used the settlement money to fund a team of lawyers who did nothing but audit the old cases of Judge Whitaker and Officer Hale. Later, Jamal stood on the steps of that same courthouse. Behind him stood hundreds of men and women. They were fathers, mothers, sons, and daughters. They were people who had been exonerated because of Jamal's work. Hundreds of lives saved from the void. Jamal held his daughter's hand. She was older now, understanding what her father had done. "Daddy," she asked, looking at the crowd cheering for him. Did you win? Jamal looked at the faces of the families reunited. He looked at the sky, clear and blue. We didn't just win, baby, Jamal said softly. We changed the game. And that is the incredible true-to-life story of how one man's arrogance became his own undoing. Judge Whitaker thought he was untouchable. He thought Jamal Reed was just another statistic. But he forgot the most important rule of the universe. What goes around comes around. And sometimes it comes around with a federal badge and a high-definition camera. Jamal Reed didn't just win his freedom. He used his victory to free hundreds of others. It's a reminder that even when the system is broken, the truth is a force that cannot be buried forever. In the end, Jamal Reed's story isn't just about one man beating an unjust system. It's about the quiet power that lives inside every person who chooses to stand up when everything seems stacked against them. Life will test you. Sometimes the test comes dressed as flashing blue lights on a dark Atlanta street, or a courtroom where the scales of justice have been quietly bought and sold. In those moments, fear whispers that it's safer to fold, to take the deal, to accept the smaller cage they offer you. But Jamal looked that fear in the eye and refused to shrink. He held on to his dignity, his truth, and his belief that right still mattered, even when every visible sign said otherwise. That's the deepest lesson here. No matter how powerful the bully wearing the robe or the badge may seem, arrogance always plants the seeds of its own destruction. What goes around doesn't just come around. It sometimes arrives with federal agents, hidden cameras, and the undeniable weight of truth. The system may bend toward corruption for a season, but it cannot withstand the steady courage of one person who simply refuses to break. Jamal didn't just walk free that day. He turned his pain into purpose, using his hard-won victory to pull hundreds of other families out of the same darkness. So, if you're facing your own impossible fight right now, if the odds feel crushing and the powerful seem untouchable, remember Jamal. Stand tall. Speak truth. Keep your heart steady. The universe has a long memory, and justice, though it may take its time, has a way of finding its way home. If Jamal's story moved you, if it reminded you of your own battles or gave you strength for the ones still ahead, drop a comment below and tell me, when life offered you a plea deal that felt wrong, did you take it or did you fight? I read every single one, and if you believe stories like this matter, hit that like button. It truly helps the channel grow. And subscribe with the bell on so you never miss the next powerful tale of courage and comeback. We've got more stories coming that will stir your soul. Thanks for watching, and remember, keep fighting the good fight. Stay strong out there.